Great to be here.
What does the Platinum Jubilee mean to you? How have you been celebrating it? And try to sum up briefly, if you can, what the Queen means to this country, because I think she is arguably the most famous person on the planet, internationally respected. No one else could bring attention to this country like her.
I agree, and I mean today, millions of people all over the world are watching what's going on. It's already brought billions into the economy, these platinum celebrations. Anybody who says, that the monarchy is a waste of money just needs to look and see what it brings into the country. But of course, it's much more than about the economy. It's about stability. It's about Britain's international standing. It's about dignity and, above all, service to others. All of those things embodied by the Queen, who, as far as I can see, has never put a foot wrong.
Absolutely. She's a remarkable woman. We're celebrating her astonishing 70 years on the throne. But I also think this is kind of becoming also a celebration of Britishness, of this country. And there's something kind of rather wonderfully post-Brexit about it, I think.
Yes, I think there is a sort of certain post-Brexit air to it, if you like. But, I mean, the Union Jacks everywhere, the street parties. It is very, very British, and nobody does pageantry like we do. Absolutely nobody. And what we don't understand sometimes is that the rest of the world is actually very, very envious of our monarchy and our traditions.
Yeah, I want to pay tribute to Emmanuel Macron, who gave a very gracious tribute to Her Majesty yesterday, as did Joe Biden, as did leaders all over the world. This is a bad weekend for Republicans, isn't it?
It's a very bad weekend for Republicans, but if they're sensible, they'll just keep quiet.
Now, let's move on to your familiar territory, politics. Of course, the big story. Boris Johnson just turned up to the St Paul's Cathedral Thanksgiving service and was roundly booed by the crowds there. And you wonder whether there are a few Tory backbenchers in those crowds, because they seem to be booing him as well. There's supposed to be about 30 letters have gone into Sir Graham Brady at the 1922 committee so far. And a head of steam is building up there. The magic number is 54 at that point. There will be a leadership contest. Do you think there will be one?
Well, I sincerely hope not, because I think what you're looking at the moment is the spectacle of a party, a very big, important political party, just losing its collective nerve, losing it completely. And with no real grounds to do so. I mean, if the general election were tomorrow, I wouldn't blame any of them for losing their nerve. But it's 2 years away. And we all know, I mean, history's littered with examples of governments, including Thatcher's, who've been very, very low in the polls midway, terrible headlines, everybody saying this is the end. They've gone on to win the next general election. And I think Boris should have a chance. I wonder how many of those people booing him had their vaccinations early because Boris was ahead of the rest of the world. I wonder how many of those people booing him wonder what President Zelensky would make of that when he has singled out Britain for praise over how Boris has dealt with the Ukraine issue. And I think he deserves to be seen in the round, not just on the basis of partygate.
I'm going to have to ask you now. I mean, I take those points. Yes, he steered us through the COVID crisis. He had to. He happened to be the Prime Minister when it happened. And he certainly didn't do a bad job of that. And he's distinguished himself in terms of Ukraine. What else has he done?
Well, to be fair, there wasn't very much he could do while COVID was raging, because we didn't know how long it was going to go on for. The impact on the economy has been horrendous. Now, all of us were saying throughout COVID, we're going to have to pay for this, as another few trillion were sort of put into the pot here, there and everywhere, and everybody was being paid to stay at home. And we were all saying, we're going to have to pay for this. Well, yeah, that time has now come. Yeah. We are going to have to pay for it, all of us. And I think we need to acknowledge that, because at the moment, all I hear is people saying, cost of living is going up, which it certainly is. What is the government going to do about it? There's actually a limit, and we should look globally. Germany's got worse food inflation than we've got. We forget things like that. We think this is just us. This is just our government. Somehow it's a purely British problem. It isn't.
As a traditional Conservative, what do you think about a Chancellor of the Exchequer, indeed a government that has so far imposed on an unsuspecting nation 15 tax rises, more probably still to come, because the millions of people are saying, oh, we're having a tough time in this cost of living crisis. Rishi Sunak and Boris basically go, well, here, have some money. And let's tax big business. Where is the conservatism in all this?
Well, one of the reasons that I haven't rejoined the Conservative Party following the dissolution of the Brexit Party was very straightforward. It was that I didn't see them acting as Conservatives. Now, there are very specific issues that I took exception to. The treatment of the Afghan interpreters was a very big one. The mess over Northern Ireland, which is largely Boris's mess, is another very big one. But the essence of conservatism is low tax, low spend, freedom of the individual.
Yes.
And we've got high tax, high spend, and huge incursions into civil liberties.
And with this, they've given it another name, but there is now going to be a windfall tax on the big energy companies. That's not Conservative, is it?
Well, it's not remotely Conservative. I wouldn't have minded that as a one-off if it was an exception to the general trend. But the general trend is to tax and tax and tax, whether it's business or individuals.
But you said earlier this is not the time to defenestrate the Prime Minister.
It's not.
I take that point. But he does seem to be very lackadaisical with the principles of the party he's supposed to represent. He just lurches from one crisis to the next and does whatever gets him good headlines tomorrow. He ought to be a bit more careful about what it means to be a Tory.
Well, I agree with you that he is not acting as a Conservative Prime Minister, and as I would have hoped he would act. Remember that he referred to this country at the start of COVID as the land of liberty. Well, I don't see any very great manifestation of that, quite honestly. I think his instincts are in the right place, but it's the execution, it's the putting them into practice, which I think is just lamentably deficient. But then I ask myself, who would do any better? And just look at them.
Well, yes, and the destabilisation that would happen if he was kicked out. Even a leadership contest will be very destabilising.
Very.
I mean, remember, Theresa May faced one of those. She won it. Boris would probably win a leadership contest, but she was gone within a year. Prime ministers who face these kind of conditions do not usually survive for long. So I think if they do force a leadership contest, the Tory backbenchers, they should be aware they're probably destroying the Prime Minister.
Oh, they're not only destroying the Prime Minister, they're probably destroying the Conservative chances at the next election. If we have a prolonged period of instability in which we don't know who the Prime Minister is going to be in a few months' time, how does that play on the international stage? And how does it play with the post-Brexit negotiations? If you don't actually know if the guy who's doing it now is going to be in post in a few months, it's quite hopeless. So I think it is profoundly irresponsible. But as I say, it's the product of a loss of nerve. I long for the politicians of yesteryear, the giants.
Like you.
No. Who kept their nerve, who were big figures, who actually were concerned about the governance of the country, not the politics of the succession of the Conservative Party or any other party.
Let's talk about, I was about to say our favourite subject, but it's certainly not our favourite subject, but it's one that you and I always discuss, and there is news on this front. We're talking, of course, about the migrants that keep coming across the channel. Now, the Rwanda migrant scheme was touted as something that just the very threat of it would stop these people coming from France to here in their dinghies. But that is on the table now, and yesterday, well, actually, since they proposed it, a fair few have come across. Yesterday, 100 came across, which took us over the 10,000 mark for this year already. The Rwanda migrant scheme, if it is to work, has to happen, doesn't it?
Nothing's going to happen until the first plane load has been sent to Rwanda, and then the threat of that will actually mean something. Initially, don't forget, when the policy was announced, we did see a drying up of crossings. Now, some of that was due to weather conditions, but also a lot of people were actually saying at Sangatte, and were saying so in interviews, that, they didn't want to go to Rwanda, they'd rather go back home, they'd rather stay where they were. So I think it did have an impact initially, but as people realised, it's not going to happen for months. We might as well go over. We're not going to be sent back to Rwanda. So, as I've said throughout this, it won't be until the first plane load leaves, and I do mean a plane load, not two, people. If the first plane load leaves, that is when it will focus minds. But until then, I actually think it might be encouraging migration, because they'll say, let's beat the deadline, let's get there before this happens.
You're right. And the other thing that always worries me is that the Crown Prosecution Service, I think it was about a year ago now, declared that for the life of them, they couldn't see how these migrants, when they arrived on our beaches, having come across the Channel by an illegal method, by a dinghy, most of them without any documents, the CPS announced then we can't see how they're breaking any of our laws. I can think of about 5.
Yes, well, of course, they're breaking the law, but the fact is that anybody is entitled to claim asylum.
Yep.
And once they have claimed asylum, that claim has to be processed individually and has to go through certain set procedures. And that is the problem. And if they justify a position of being entitled to asylum, then how they get here doesn't matter. But you mentioned documents, and that is crucial, because we've taken our eye off the ball because we're only looking at the Channel at the moment, but another ruse that is widely practiced is at Heathrow and the big airports, whereby they cannot get on a plane without documentation. So they've had documentation at the point they got on the plane.
When they arrive, they haven't got
When they arrive, they haven't got any documentation because they've lost it down the plane's lavatories or something, or they've hidden it somewhere. And they stay airside for hours on end. So when they present to the desk, you can't even tell where they've come from. You don't know which plane they've been on.
I didn't realise that was their technique. Just quickly, we've only got a minute left, but so we need... I was going to ask you, what exactly would you do to solve the migrant crisis?
First of all, I would implement Rwanda. And if there were legal challenges, I would face those legal challenges and expedite them and get it over and say, let's have a test case. And secondly, I would have immigration officers meeting the planes. Now, that's what I said as long ago as 1999 when I was Shadow Home Secretary. I said we need to meet the planes. It will cost a bit more money. It will be administratively complicated to administer, but it is perfectly possible. And that should be what happens. So if you get off a plane without documentation, A, the airline should be fined because they can't transport you without documentation, but B, you know where that plane's come from. And if it's come from a safe country, that's your answer.
So what, to go back to the political scene generally, what has happened to our politicians? People like you, people like Margaret Thatcher, and some of the great Labour politicians of the past. What's happened to the stature of the people in that Westminster Palace down the road from here?
Well, as I asked in my Express column, very good column, by the way, every Wednesday.
Brilliant. Yes.
As I asked in my Express column this week, can you imagine the Heseltines, the Lawsons, the Owens, the Barbara Castles? Can you imagine these people indulging in that sort of drinking culture at the seat of government, which is what went on in Downing Street? And the answer is no, you can't imagine it, because they were actually focused on delivering properly for the country. It's a very complicated story as to where they've gone, but there are 3 main strands. One is that we've chucked merit as a criterion for selection, and we're now looking at quotas, we're looking at getting more women in, more ethnics in, more sexually diverse people in. That is one. The second is that the parliamentary service as a profession is now not held in much respect. If you've been a serious player in this world, and you've done big things in the outside world, do you really want to join a profession where every single bus ticket is held up to ridicule? Is that what you want to do? And of course you don't. And the other thing is the invasion of privacy, not just of the individual, because you expect that if you come into public life, but of families. That has grown immensely.
Yes, well, as I say, you yearn for the heyday of the great politicians, and I include you among them. And I always say I wish you were in Westminster right now, and it's great that you came in, and lovely to see you.